Swinging from street lights, I wish we could go back to when we went singing in the rain.
You are listening to Singing in the Rain, a podcast series that interviews artists, educators, and innovators who are focused on positive social change in difficult times. Singing in the Rain is a production brought to you by Claremont Lincoln University, CLU Live. I heard a story recently. Can I tell you a story? I know you're very good at stories. I want to tell you a story about a Texan. You ever been to Texas?
Yeah, a time or two.
So I heard a story recently about a minister who was driving through Texas, and he sees a farm, and the farm is beautiful. All kinds of crops, just thriving, doing really well. And so the minister says, wow, this is amazing. I'm going to stop and talk to that farmer. And so he does. He pulls over to the side of the road, and the farmer's out there working, as expected. And so he waves down the farmer. He says, hey, come here, come here. Farmer gets off his tractor, wipes his brow, says, yes, sir, how can I help you? That's how they talk in Texas. How can I help you there, minister? The minister says to him, I just wanted you to know, farmer, that God has blessed you with an amazing farm and all these wonderful crops, and you should be grateful. And the farmer looks at him and he says, you're right there, minister, and we are grateful, but you should have seen this place when he had it all to himself. So all these crops, everything that's out here, the beauty that's in this place today, everything that we're going to do today, and then some, and the graduates tomorrow, it's all the fruit of the labor that was put in at the beginning. Can you walk us through the beginning of Claremont Lincoln University? Why do we exist? And again, it's just us here, but maybe other people want to know about it as well.
Yeah, I'll walk you through the version of it that I remember, and remember that it's true, everything I say, but it's my memory.
Noted.
The early 2000s, 2006 is when I arrived at Claremont School of Theology as president. Those were tough years for seminaries, and seminaries are still having tough times because of the way the newer generations are responding to religious viewpoints, and maybe more particularly how the rising generations respond to a traditional stubbornness. Yes. And institutions, religious institutions, have some, we call it solid tradition. You could also call it stubbornness in certain viewpoints. So, but those were hard times, and the question was, what could we do to ensure that the Claremont School of Theology had a successful future? And Claremont School of Theology had been the School of Theology of the University of Southern California in its origins, and it had been that until the 1950s, when the University of Southern California separated itself from the Methodist Church. When that happened, the School of Theology then moved to Claremont as an independent institution. And because of that move and the time it took place, the Methodist Church decided to allow Claremont School of Theology to be an ecumenical experiment. And by that, the issue was, could a Methodist school accept Baptist students?
Oh boy.
Serious stuff. And
yes.
And not only that, but could they take Presbyterians or disciples of Christ?
Oh wow, now we're getting out of hand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now we're getting way.
Okay.
And so Claremont School of Theology became the first Methodist school to have open arms to any Christian who wanted to sign up for a School of Theology education. Mm-hmm. And it was, I would say, wildly successful. And of course, by 2006, every other United Methodist school of theology was ecumenical in its character, although Methodist in its background and its ethos. But it accepted, there are 13 of them, including Claremont School of Theology. They all accept students of any denomination who wants to come. So the question then became for us in 2006, what can we do to guarantee a bright future for Claremont School of Theology? And we knew it was going to be hard. And so the corollary to that question is, what would make it worth it? Because there's going to be a lot of work to keep things going.
Can you emphasize that last point? You
Pardon?
said it's going to be a lot of work
to
keep things going? Okay.
It is going to be a lot of work. Mm-hmm. So what would make that work worth it? There were 12 other United Methodist seminaries, so we didn't really need 13. I mean, don't tell anyone I said that. But
your secret's safe with me.
12 would have been enough. So I have always had the idea that we all ought to learn to live together and work together peacefully and in harmony. And I had the peculiar feeling that I was a Christian because where I grew up in northwest Texas, in that little ranching community.
You grew up in Texas?
I grew up in Texas.
So you knew the story. Okay, sorry. All right.
Where I grew up, it was a little community, and I had three choices for religion: Methodist, Baptist, or Church of Christ. That was it. And as a young person, I really didn't know there were other religions, except maybe you could be a cowboy. That's
and you are now, from what I hear. Okay.
That's close to religion. And so I thought, if I'd been born in Saudi Arabia, I would have been a Muslim. If I'd been born other places, I would have been a Buddhist. If I'd been born other places, I would have been. Fill in the blank. And so the circumstances of my birth, it seemed to me, did not make my religion better than anyone else's. And we fall into that trap. So when I was given the job of figuring out something for the future of Claremont School of Theology, I said, well, we were the first Methodist school to be ecumenical. Why don't we become the first Methodist seminary to become multi-religious? Uh-oh. Well, and that's what caught David's attention, and that's when he wrote me the first letter. He said, sort of basically, now you're talking, but it's there's a lot of work, and so we sat down, and I went on retreat and worked out a plan to grow the School of Theology into an interreligious university. It would keep a Christian character, but it would also invite a Muslim partner and Jewish partners and Buddhist partners and create a kind of interdisciplinary, multi-religious environment. And the trustees thought that was a good idea. The students seemed to like it. Our alumni loved it. And so we started what we call the University Project. The United Methodist Church didn't like it. And so they said, really, you can't do that. And so I said, well, I guess that's the end of the road. And David Lincoln says, no, that's just, like there's a country song called A Dead End is Just a Place to Turn Around.
Okay. I like that song.
So we turned around. I said, well, okay, how do we go from here? And he said, well, you'd have to figure out how to start your own university. We just have to, we being you, just incorporate
Just figure it out.
a university in California. And so we incorporated Claremont Lincoln University. Separate corporation, stands on its own. It's not related to, corporately related to any other entity. It's a standalone, freestanding university. And so that was kind of the genesis of it. It started because we thought it's not enough to teach someone that the golden rule is important. And most religions do that. And all of the major religions have a statement, something like the golden rule. But none of them teach you how to do it. We tell you to do it. It's important. Love your neighbors yourself. But it turns out that's pretty hard.
Really?
That's a pretty hard way to live unless you know some things. What are those things you have to know?
Why the golden rule? There are a lot of things you could have founded this on when we think about it. But why the golden rule? Was that a conversation that you had with David? Was that something that was already in the works when you think about the golden rule?
Yeah, it's a conversation that David and I had seriously, sitting around the table with some other folks. The chair of our board at that time was Sandy Bain, and Sandy was in on these conversations. The golden rule is worth more than being a religious principle. It is a foundation for how life works best. And David came at this from a different direction because of his background. His watchword was good ethics is good business. And David defined ethics as applying the golden rule. That was his definition of ethics. And so in places where, for instance, on borders, where you find people trading goods across the border, treating each other fairly, then you have a peaceful border. And so it turns out that the golden rule is foundational for good, not only for good business, but for good life. And so we couldn't come up with a better principle than the golden rule as a founding principle. And we also looked at current models of education, and you might say, hyperbole, is overstatement in the interest of truth, so allow me to use a hyperbole here. If you look at American education, it has tended toward being successful by virtue of competition, beating your competitors, wearing them down any way you can. Good business is any kind of business you can get away with. I mean, our educational system didn't put ethics front and center in how to behave in any area of life, from business to art to medicine. So we thought this is a principle that in some ways, it started out in the old concept of liberal arts, but it found its way to the bottom of the stack. And we wanted to bring it back as a founding principle for Claremont Lincoln University. And the interesting thing was, no one taught it. And so we had the quandary. We had to wonder, well, how do you teach? What would you teach people to improve their understanding of how to get along and how to apply the Golden Rule. And so that's when what we know as the Core was born.
Okay, I do want to talk about the Core. I have a question for you, though, because you mentioned business and it got me thinking. 2008, there's a lot going on in this country. Also something called the Great Recession was impacting the nation. You, Mr. Lincoln, a few others decide to launch a school shortly thereafter in tough economic times in the country. Was that a thought? Was that more of the cowboy spirit to look at how you're going to launch a university? I guess the real question is, why do it? Why do it at a time in which we have so many colleges and universities competing? Why launch another one? And especially during tough economic times.
Yeah, why? So I have a modest portfolio for my retirement, and one of the things that the fellow who manages that says to me is, you can't time the market.
That's right.
And the only time, so okay, one other, I have to put a caveat in here. I have now lived 60 years longer than I was supposed to. So I was born with a congenital heart defect and was going to die at 13. I became the sixth experiment of a man named Michael DeBakey down in Texas, because they got him to move to Texas because they told him he could experiment on little cowboys because they had a lot of them to spare. Ever since then, I've been aware of the fact I wouldn't live forever. And, the odd thing is I seem to be hard to kill.
We like that.
But, so 2008, economic times are bad. The world is having its messes around and about, and universities are having a hard time, and schools of theology are having a hard time, and we start another school. The only time that you and I have to do something is while we're alive and can do it. It's easy to find reasons to wait.
Right.
It's easy to procrastinate and put things off. And the more we do, the more good things never get done. And one other thing is, so let's say it was my job to get it started. It's your job to worry about how to keep it going.
Yeah.
So I've never felt as if either that Claremont Lincoln belonged partially to me, nor have I felt like its future is all in my hands. Something like Claremont Lincoln, we did it because it was the right thing to do. The world needs it. The educational world needs a readjustment. And one of the ways you make the readjustment is you do something startlingly different. So the Methodist Church wouldn't let us turn Claremont School of Theology into a multi-religious university. Mm-hmm. But now, all 13 of the United Methodist seminaries have multi-religious programs.
Yeah.
None of them did when we started this enterprise. So one of the ways you change the world is by showing something different. Now, in some cases, it might not survive, but you will still have made the difference by showing the world that it ought to be there. And I take comfort in the fact that some of the big universities are now, who first said Claremont Lincoln doesn't really have an educational focus. Now they're doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
They can't use. Although they can't use our trademark phrase.
No, we will sue. We will. Could we maybe unpack this core a bit? We talked about the golden rule, and as we like to say, our secret sauce is the core: mindfulness, dialogue, collaboration, and change. Where did that come from? Was that just a lot of coffee and maybe sugar incorporated into that? I mean, it seems as though it was built in a way to be effective no matter the environment. And it's an amazing skill set that I feel our students obtain while here, and then our graduates put in place. Talk to me about the core. How did that come to be?
So the core is, it's one of the distinctive and fresh ideas that Claremont Lincoln University brought to the educational world. And everything is now here is kind of condensed and summarized, but let me give you the structure by how it came along. Our first attempt at a curriculum looked a lot like the curriculum of a school of theology, because we had several schools of theology collaborating to create it, the faculties of those schools.
Yes.
And if you look back at it, it looked very much like a school of theology curriculum. And so it still didn't quite get the job done. And we were worried about that. And while we were worrying about it, the School of Theology decided, for its own reasons, that it had to divorce us. We were never corporately connected to them, but we were under their auspices for accreditation. Once we began to move toward accreditation for ourselves, it was not necessary to remain under their auspices. And so they pushed us out, which felt really bad at the moment that it happened. Is another one of those opportunities to turn around that we faced in creating a new institution. But then it dawned on us, and I'm using the royal us, it dawned on me that teaching people how to get along and how to bring about constructive change in the world for the better was not an agenda just for students of theology. Everyone needs to know how to do this in their life pursuits.
Right.
And so Claremont Lincoln, the idea for Claremont Lincoln all of a sudden became a lot larger than where it started. It might have been harder to seize on the golden rule if we had started somewhere else, because that's such an obvious place to begin in a theological setting. But once you look at the golden rule itself, it's not a religious statement, right? It's how we ought to behave toward one another. It's part of human character. We work better when we're behaving that way. Mm-hmm. And the world works better when we're behaving that way.
Right.
And so the question was, how do we make Claremont Lincoln then available for everyone? Because that's what the world needs, and that's what we need in populating the world. So we sat down. We had some jam sessions, where we would...
Jam sessions.
Jam sessions. We
Okay.
got everybody together. It was very much a group activity. We were small enough as a fledgling institution to get everyone around the table. We could get all of the staff in one room easily. And so we started saying, all right, how do we teach the golden rule? I mean, what is really in it? And that's when we came up with these elements. First off, to treat someone else the way you would like them to treat you, you really need to know yourself. You need to know something about yourself. You need to be able to be comfortable in your skin. You need to be able to say, here's what I believe, and I'm comfortable with that. And I know that what I believe is not what everyone believes, and that's not a requirement. It's getting comfortable with who you are on your own terms, and then being able to tell other people what you believe without doing it in an evangelical way, right?
Yes.
I can tell you what I believe, and you will be my friend. You don't have to believe the same thing I do, because I know part of what I believe is kind of goofy.
Maybe.
All of us have
Just
that
a
little
little bit.
goofy element in it, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's okay as part of human nature. We can be okay with that. So we figured out self-awareness, mindfulness
Yes.
is a fundamental requirement. We need to know who we are and be honest about it, and be able to talk about it in a non-threatening way.
Right.
Now, once we can do that, we need to be able to hear
Yeah.
I need to be able to hear how you're different and not feel threatened.
Have
right?
a dialogue.
It's called dialogue.
Yeah.
Have an honest, open dialogue. We need to know how to do that and know that we're doing it. There's a level of self-consciousness. You know yourself, and you know what you're doing in entering into a dialogue with someone else. I literally had someone come to see me and then tell me he couldn't talk to me because he knew what I believed was wrong.
Oh,
And I said, well, why'd you come to see me?
right.
We can sit in silence, and that's okay with me. Anyway, so we need to be able to reach out and talk. Now, if we're going to get something done, okay, the golden rule, really, we sort of enhanced the golden rule to say it also means when you love your neighbor, you're willing to interfere in a kind and gracious way.
Yeah.
You have to work together.
Collaborate.
If we can teach people to collaborate in a constructive way, then communities made up of all different kinds of people can have have the same sewer, right? I mean, just imagine if every group had to have a different sewer,
Right.
or every group had to have a different source of water. It's a nutty idea.
Yes.
So we want to make it possible for people to collaborate. And what are you going to collaborate on? Well, we want people that are going to make the world a better place, and to do that,
To change something.
you got to change things.
Okay.
And so it was a kind of iterative conversation, and the culmination of it was what we had as a beginning core faculty from the consortium of schools of theology had decided no, they're not going to be involved. So we created a session where we invited faculty from around the country to come and spend 3 days putting some meat on the bones of this core. First kicking around the core. Are those the 4 things?
Yes.
Will those 4 things suffice as a beginning place?
Yes.
And if not, what do we change and what do we say? at the end of the discussion of that, that was the core.
And so what you're describing, and for those who know, because we've continued this practice, you're describing the curriculum lab experience.
We invented something called the curriculum lab, and that was the first one where faculty members from around the country came. We also included, so it's not just carrying out the golden rule and working with other people is not just a head trip. It's not an academic exercise. So we thought, it's when we get a faculty together, we want to include some good practitioners as well as teachers. So that first group was not just teaching faculty. It included people who are actually doing things in these areas.
Yeah.
And so that was the first curriculum lab.
And it was fantastic. I want to be mindful of your time, Dr. Campbell. We have questions. I'm going to read one of the questions that's on top. And I don't know who wrote this, but I've laid this out here. And it says, Jerry, why are you so handsome? That's literally a question that was in there. So
well.
So Dr. Campbell, I want to thank you. I really do. I want to thank you for your time.
The good Lord gave me a bad heart, but a good face.
I would say this to you, as someone who is a benefactor of the work that you've done here. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the work that you've done to start this great university. And I know you understand this, and you know very well that we're doing all that we can to move this place forward. But without you, we wouldn't exist. So thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
You have been listening to Singing in the Rain, a podcast series that interviews artists, educators, and innovators who are focused on positive social change in difficult times. Singing in the Rain is a production brought to you by Claremont Lincoln University, CLU Live. For more, subscribe, share, and visit us at claremontlincoln.edu.